The night my son celebrated the biggest promotion of his life, he took his boss, his coworkers, his wife, and half the family to one of the nicest restaurants in town. Everyone except me. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard my daughter-in-law whisper to him near the front door, "Your father will embarrass you in front of these people." My son was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad will be fine here." That hurt more than anything she could have said. An hour later, while they were ordering steaks and raising glasses to his new future, my phone buzzed. It was a message from his wife. "Dad, finish the leftovers in the fridge." I stared at those words until the screen went dark. Then I typed one word, "Okay." I opened the refrigerator, looked at the plastic container they had left for me, and closed the door. I never touched it. Instead, I went upstairs, packed 2 suitcases, took the photograph of my late wife from my dresser, and left my house key on the kitchen counter. They thought I would cool off. They thought I would run out of money. They thought I needed them far more than they needed me. They were wrong about all 3, because 6 weeks later, my son called me with panic in his voice. "Dad, I'm about to lose my promotion." What he still didn't understand was that losing me had exposed something far bigger than a childcare problem. And before this was over, he would discover exactly how much of his success had been carried by the father he was too embarrassed to invite to dinner. My name is Walter Bennett. I'm 68 years old, and before I retired, I spent more than 3 decades working maintenance for the public school district outside Dayton, Ohio, the last 12 of them supervising crews, emergency repairs, and buildings that seemed determined to break at the worst possible time. I'd been a widower for 4 years, and after my wife, Helen, died, I moved in with our only son, Eric, telling myself it made sense for all of us. The afternoon of Eric's promotion dinner, I was standing under his kitchen sink with a flashlight between my teeth. The drain had been leaking again. I had already bought the replacement washer that morning, along with milk, bread, cereal Emma liked, and the coffee Lauren insisted was the only kind that didn't give her headaches. Before leaving the grocery store, I had also called the plumber about the upstairs bathroom. He was coming Tuesday between 8 and noon, which meant I would need to stay home. None of that seemed unusual. That was the problem. "Grandpa?" I backed out from beneath the sink and found my 10-year-old granddaughter, Emma, standing there in a blue dress. Her hair had been curled. "You look fancy," I said. She smiled. "Mom did it. You going somewhere?" Before she could answer, Lauren appeared behind her. My daughter-in-law was wearing a black dress I had never seen before, and earrings that caught the kitchen light every time she moved her head. "Emma, sweetheart, go find your shoes." Emma hurried off. Lauren glanced at the grocery bags on the counter. "You got the sparkling water?" 2 cases. "Good." She was already walking away when I asked, "What's the occasion?" She stopped. For half a second, she had the look of someone who had been caught forgetting something. "Eric's promotion dinner." "Oh?" I wiped my hands on an old dish towel. Eric had received the news 2 days earlier. Regional operations manager. I didn't understand every part of the job, but I understood what it meant to him. He had worked toward that title for years. I had been proud enough to tell the cashier at the hardware store. "I thought you were doing something with work people," I said. "We are." That was when Eric came down the stairs in a charcoal suit. He looked sharp. Older somehow. More like the men whose photographs appeared in business magazines than the boy who once came home from Little League crying because he had struck out 3 times. I smiled. "Look at you." Eric adjusted his cuff. "Not bad, huh? Your mother would have taken 50 pictures. His smile changed for just a second. "Yeah, she would have. Helen would have made a production out of it. New shirt, good restaurant, too much dessert. She believed achievements should be marked because life had a way of taking enough things away without permission." I thought about asking what time they were leaving. Then the doorbell rang. Lauren opened it. Her parents, Tom and Beverly, walked in. Tom was wearing a sport coat. Beverly carried a wrapped bottle of wine. "Well," Tom said when he saw Eric, "there's our big executive." They laughed. Something in my chest tightened. I looked from Tom to Beverly to Lauren. "So this isn't just coworkers." Lauren busied herself with Emma's coat. "Marianne invited spouses. Some family, too." "Some family." I nodded once. Nobody said anything else. That silence told me more than an explanation would have. I went back to the kitchen and put the wrench beneath the sink. A few minutes later, while I was washing my hands, I heard Lauren speaking in the hallway. She wasn't whispering exactly, but her voice had that lowered edge people use when they don't want words traveling through a house. "Your boss is going to be there." Eric said something too quietly for me to catch. Lauren answered, That's exactly my point. Your dad starts talking about boilers and broken toilets and those guys from the maintenance shop. He'll mention where you grew up. He'll tell some story about shopping at Costco or fixing your first car in the driveway. I stopped with my hands beneath the faucet. Water ran over my fingers. So, Eric said, so this is important. These people need to see you differently now. A pause. Then Lauren said the words plainly. He'll embarrass you. I waited. I don't know what I expected from my son. Anger, maybe. A laugh. Even a simple, don't talk about Dad that way. Instead, Eric sighed. Dad will be fine here. The faucet was still running. I shut it off. My hands dripped onto the counter. There are moments when something doesn't break all at once. It just settles into place. I thought about the years I had spent keeping school buildings running while teachers taught and principals held meetings in clean, warm rooms. Nobody cared much about the boiler until it stopped working. I suppose families can be like that too. 10 minutes later, they gathered at the front door. Eric called toward the kitchen. We won't be too late, Dad. All right. Emma ran back and hugged me around the waist. Bye, Grandpa. I kissed the top of her head. Have fun, sweetheart. Lauren reminded me the plumber was coming Tuesday. Eric asked if I could pick up more coffee filters tomorrow. Then the door closed. I stood alone in the hallway. The house became very quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. I went into the kitchen and saw 6 grocery bags I had emptied. The repaired sink, Emma's school calendar held to the refrigerator by a magnet, and the plumber's number written in my handwriting. About an hour later, my phone vibrated. Lauren. Dad, finish the leftovers in the fridge. I read it once. Then again. I typed, okay. I put the phone down. The refrigerator hummed beside me. I opened it. There was the container, pushed toward the front shelf so I wouldn't miss it. I closed the door. Upstairs, I pulled 2 old suitcases from the closet. I packed clothes, my medications, a shaving kit, and the framed photograph of Helen that had sat beside my bed since the week she died. I didn't take much. I wasn't sure where I was going. I only knew where I wasn't staying. Before I left, I put my house key on the kitchen counter beside the grocery receipt. Then I walked out, got into my pickup, and drove. 3 miles from the house, my phone lit up again. Another message from Lauren. Don't forget, Emma has school Monday. I read Lauren's message twice before setting the phone face down on the passenger seat. Emma had school Monday. Of course she did. For years, I had been the one who knew which mornings required an early drop-off, which Thursdays she stayed late for art club, and which Fridays she needed $5 tucked into the front pocket of her backpack for cafeteria ice cream. Apparently, leaving the house had not changed the family calendar in Lauren's mind. It had only changed my address. I drove another 20 minutes before pulling into an extended stay motel near the interstate. The sign advertised weekly rates in bright red letters. The lobby smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner, and the young man behind the desk barely looked up when I asked for a room. The weekly price made me blink. I almost asked him to repeat it. Instead, I handed over my credit card. The room was on the 2nd floor. 1 bed, 1 chair. A narrow counter with a microwave and a refrigerator small enough that I could have carried it under one arm 20 years earlier. The air conditioner rattled whenever it kicked on. Outside my window, headlights moved through the parking lot and disappeared toward the highway. I set Helen's photograph on the nightstand. That was when leaving stopped feeling brave. At Eric's house, there was always noise. Emma running upstairs, Lauren talking on the phone, the washing machine, cabinets opening, a television somewhere. Here, I could hear the refrigerator compressor. I sat on the edge of the bed without taking off my shoes. My phone rang. Eric. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad, where are you? I'm somewhere safe. What does that mean? It means I'm safe. There was a pause. Then his voice changed into the tone he used when a work problem had landed on his desk. What are we supposed to do Monday morning? I looked at the motel curtains. About what? Emma. You take her to school. Dad, I have an early meeting. Then Lauren can. She has a showing. Neither of us spoke. Eric tried again. And the plumber is coming Tuesday. I know. You arranged it. I gave Lauren the number. What about groceries? There's food in the house. That's not what I mean. I knew exactly what he meant. He meant who would notice when the milk was low. Who would remember Emma needed poster board on Wednesday? Who would stand in the house for 4 hours waiting for a plumber who might arrive sometime between breakfast and lunch? Finally, Eric said, "This is ridiculous." Maybe it was. I was 68 years old. sitting in a motel room with 2 suitcases because my own family had gone to dinner without me. But going back because their errands were inconvenient felt even more ridiculous. "I'm not coming back tonight," I said. Lauren's voice came faintly through the phone. "Ask him how long he plans to keep this up." Eric covered the receiver, although not well enough. Then he said, "Lauren thinks you're making a big deal out of one dinner." I heard her. Another silence. "Dad, she shouldn't have said that." "No, but packing your bags." "I packed my bags because I wanted to leave." "You live with us." "I did." The words slipped out before I had planned it. Eric went quiet. Then he asked for the first time, "Where are you staying?" "I told you. I'm safe." He exhaled hard. "We'll talk tomorrow." "All right. And Monday?" "We just talked about Monday." He hung up. 10 minutes later, Lauren called. I didn't answer. She texted instead, "You're upsetting everyone." Then another, "You can't just walk away from responsibilities." I stared at that one longer. Responsibilities. I typed, "Emma is my granddaughter. She is not my responsibility to raise." I nearly deleted it. Instead, I sent it. Lauren replied almost immediately. No one said raise her. I put the phone down. The difference between helping and being expected to help had become so thin in that house, I wasn't sure any of us knew when it disappeared. I slept badly. Around midnight, someone laughed loudly in the hallway. At 2, a car alarm went off. At 4, I woke convinced I had heard Emma calling for me. By morning, my neck hurt and the room looked even smaller. I bought coffee from the lobby machine and sat beside the window. Freedom, I discovered, came with a weekly rate, thin towels, and nobody asking whether you wanted breakfast. At 9, my phone rang again. "Emma." "Hi, Grandpa." Her voice was careful. "Morning, sweetheart. Are you mad at me?" The question hit harder than Lauren's insult had. "No, absolutely not. Mom said you wanted to leave." "I did leave, but not because of you." "Are you coming back?" I looked at Helen's photograph. "I don't know." Emma was quiet. Then she asked, "Who's going to pick me up from school?" That told me how normal the arrangement had become for her, too. "Your mom and dad will work that out." "But you always do it." "I know. Do you not want to anymore?" "I want to spend time with you very much." I chose my words carefully. But spending time with you and being the person who has to be available every time your parents are busy are 2 different things. She thought about that. "So can we still get ice cream?" I smiled for the first time since leaving. "Yes." "And go fishing?" "Yes. Even if you don't live here?" "Especially then." She seemed satisfied with that. We talked another few minutes about school and a book she was reading. Then her voice dropped. "Grandpa?" "Yes?" "Mom says you'll come back when your money runs out." Emma's words stayed with me long after the call ended. "Mom says you'll come back when your money runs out." I didn't blame Emma for repeating it. 10-year-olds report adult conversations without always knowing which words are supposed to hurt. Still, Lauren had put her finger on the one thing I had been trying not to think about. Money. I opened my laptop on the little motel desk and signed into my bank account. The numbers looked different when there was no family kitchen around me, no paid-off house sheltering the monthly expenses, no assumption that next week would look like the week before. My pension came in regularly. Social Security covered another piece. I wasn't broke, but I wasn't as comfortable as I had believed, either. For several years, I had treated what I spent at Eric's house as incidental: groceries, Emma's school shoes, a replacement garbage disposal, soccer registration when Lauren said the month had been tight, a service call when the furnace quit. I had never kept a running total because keeping score with family had always seemed cheap to me. Now I wished I had at least paid attention. I pulled up 6 months of statements and started adding. The calculator on my phone kept producing numbers I wanted to argue with. Groceries alone were several $100s most months. Then came repairs, school expenses, gas from driving Emma around, household supplies, and all those little purchases nobody remembered 2 days later. None of them had ruined me. Together, they had quietly reduced the cushion I thought I had. The motel charged by the week, and the rate was no bargain once taxes were added. A decent apartment would mean a security deposit, first month's rent, utilities, and fees I hadn't paid in years. I could live on retirement income. I could not live carelessly on it. By 10 that morning, I had made a decision. I needed a job, not a career. I had already given enough years to emergency calls and leaking roofs, something part-time, 20 hours, maybe 30, enough to cover rent without watching my savings shrink every month. I had an old resume saved on the laptop from when the school district asked supervisors to update personnel files. It was 9 years out of date. I spent most of the afternoon fixing it. 35 years of work looked strangely small when reduced to bullet points. Preventive maintenance, vendor coordination, inventory control, emergency response, crew supervision. I knew what those things meant when a heating system failed in January and 600 children were arriving in 40 minutes. Online, they looked like words anybody could type. The first hardware store application asked me to create an account, verify an email address, upload my resume, then enter every piece of information from the resume into separate boxes anyway. I muttered something Helen would have told me not to say in front of Emma. The next application asked about inventory software I had never used. Another wanted experience with a digital work order platform I had heard of but never touched. At the school district, we had moved onto tablets during my final years, but younger supervisors handled most system changes. I had known every boiler, shutoff valve, custodian, and contractor in our buildings. Apparently, knowing where everything actually was had become less impressive than knowing which menu to click. I applied anyway. Maintenance technician, warehouse receiving associate, apartment complex maintenance assistant, hardware department associate. By evening, my eyes burned from the screen. I opened one suitcase, looking for an envelope with my social security card, and found a stack of papers I had thrown in at the last minute. Old insurance records, Helen's death certificate, a few pension forms. Underneath them was a yellow legal pad bent at one corner. I recognized Eric's handwriting before I recognized my own. Years earlier, when he was still supervising one warehouse, he had come to my house frustrated about a backlog his team couldn't clear. We had sat at the kitchen table after dinner, drawing boxes and arrows while I asked who handled what and where jobs kept getting stuck. The pages were still covered with circles, names, and lines connecting one task to another. I smiled at how serious we had both been. Then I put the pad back under the papers. It was an old problem from another life. My phone buzzed. Eric. Dad, you don't have to prove anything. Come home. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a minute, the motel room seemed smaller than ever. I typed, "Maybe you're right." I looked at those 3 words. Then I deleted them one by one. I set the phone aside and submitted another application. The next morning, it rang just after 8. When the first employer finally called, I thought my luck had changed. By noon, I knew better. The call came from a property management company across town. The woman on the phone sounded cheerful enough, and for the first 5 minutes I let myself believe the interview might lead somewhere. They managed 4 apartment complexes and needed someone who could handle preventive maintenance, emergency repairs, vendor schedules, and work orders. That sounded familiar. For once, I did not have to pretend I understood the job. By 9:30, I was sitting across from a man named Kevin in a small office attached to one of their leasing centers. He looked to be in his 40s and spent more time studying the screen in front of him than looking at me. "You supervised maintenance for the school district? Last 12 years before retirement. How many buildings?" 7 at the end. More than that before the district reorganized. He nodded. "Boilers? Plenty. Electrical? Enough to know when to handle it and when to call somebody licensed." That got half a smile. For the first time since I started applying, I relaxed. Then Kevin turned the monitor toward me. "We use this for everything now. Work orders, inventory, vendor approvals, inspection photos, scheduling. Boxes and menus covered the screen. I've used electronic work orders," I said. "This system? No." He clicked through several windows quickly. "Mobile app too. I can learn." "I'm sure you can." There are sentences that sound encouraging until you hear the word after them. "But," Kevin folded his hands, "we need somebody who can step in immediately. We have another candidate who's been using this platform for 3 years. I knew what he was telling me. He was decent enough not to stretch it out. I thanked him for his time and drove back to the motel. Another rejection arrived in my email before I reached the parking lot. A hardware store. 2 hours later, a warehouse sent one. By the end of the afternoon, I had stopped opening them immediately. Around 3:30, my phone rang. "Eric." I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered, "Hello? Dad, where are you?" "At the motel." "No, I mean right now. In my room. Can you pick Emma up?" I looked at the clock. "From school?" "Yes. I thought you and Lauren had that worked out." "We did." The sharpness in his voice told me they clearly had not. "Lauren's sitter canceled. She's across town with clients, and I'm about to go into a meeting with Mary Ann and 2 regional directors. So call another sitter. We don't have another sitter. What about one of Emma's friends? Dad, please. School gets out in 40 minutes. I said nothing. Eric filled the silence. You're 15 minutes away. That was probably true. He knew exactly where my motel was now. You can pick her up like always. Like always. I stared at the old air conditioner beneath the window. I'm not available. You're sitting in a motel room. My jaw tightened. That doesn't make me available. Dad, come on. Eric, this meeting matters. I'm sure it does. If I leave now, I'm walking out right before Marianne reviews the regional rollout. He sounded genuinely afraid. For a moment, the old machinery inside me started turning. Get the keys. Pick up Emma. Keep Eric from missing the meeting. It would take less than an hour. I had solved bigger problems before breakfast. Then I remembered the promotion dinner, not the restaurant, not even Lauren's massage. I remembered Eric standing in the hallway while his wife said I would embarrass him. Dad will be fine here. I rested my hand on my knee. What does the new job actually require? I asked. What? Your promotion, travel, late meetings? Dad, this isn't the time. It seems like exactly the time. He exhaled. Yes, some travel, evening calls, maybe 1 or 2 overnight trips a month. And you knew that before you accepted it. Yes. So what was the plan for Emma? Silence. For the house? I continued. For days Lauren has clients? For school pickups when you're out of town? Dad, what was the plan? He answered too quickly. We thought you'd be here. Neither of us said anything. I sat very still, not because the answer surprised me completely, because of how naturally he had said it. Not we hoped you could help. Not we were going to ask. We thought you'd be here. My time had been built into the promotion before anyone had bothered to tell me. Eric must have realized what he had said. That came out wrong, did it? You were living with us. I know where I was living. And you always helped with Emma. Helped? Yes. That's an interesting word. Dad, can we please not do this right now? I'm not doing anything. That was the strange part. For years, whenever Eric had a problem, I did something, drove somewhere, fixed something, paid something, waited for someone. Today, I was sitting in a motel room doing absolutely nothing. And apparently that had become a crisis. Eric lowered his voice. I have to go. All right, I'll figure it out. I'm sure you will. He hung up. I never found out that afternoon whether Lauren canceled her appointment or Eric missed part of his meeting. I did not call to ask. That evening, I sat at the little desk with the motel notepad in front of me. At the top I wrote, being here. Then I started listing things. School pickup, morning drop-off, groceries, dinner, plumber, furnace filters, package deliveries, soccer practice, oil changes, homework when Eric worked late, waiting for contractors, emergency babysitting. I kept writing. When I reached the bottom of the page, I turned it over. That night I wrote down everything being here had actually meant, and the list filled the entire motel notepad. By the time I finished that list, the motel notepad looked less like a collection of chores and more like a job description nobody had ever bothered to write down. I folded it once and slipped it into the side pocket of my suitcase. Then I went back to looking for a real job. The next week was worse than the one before it. Every morning I made coffee in the motel room, opened my laptop, and checked the same websites. Maintenance assistant, receiving clerk, hardware associate, building services, property technician. I applied for anything I could reasonably do without pretending I was still 45. By Thursday, I had sent out 26 applications. I knew because I kept count on the back of an envelope. 6 employers rejected me. 4 sent automated messages saying they had chosen other candidates. The rest said nothing at all. Silence was becoming familiar. The motel bill came due every Monday. Each time the clerk slid the receipt across the counter, I watched another piece of my checking account disappear. I started making little adjustments. No restaurant breakfast, no buying coffee downstairs, no driving unless I had somewhere specific to go. I bought oatmeal, bananas, sandwich meat, and soup I could heat in the microwave. It was strange how quickly a man could go from paying for someone else's groceries without thinking about it to standing in a grocery aisle comparing 2 brands of bread because one cost 70 cents less. I told myself it was temporary. Some days I believed it. Other days, not so much. Eric texted twice during that week. The first message said, "You doing okay?" I answered, "I'm fine." The second came 2 days later. "Your room is still here." I didn't answer that one. Friday evening, I got another rejection from an apartment complex. I closed the laptop and sat there listening to the air conditioner shake against the wall. My back hurt from the cheap desk chair, The television was on with the sound muted, though I couldn't remember turning it on. I opened the mini fridge. Inside was half a turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper. I had bought it the night before and eaten the other half standing over the sink. For a second, I just stared at it. Dad, finish the leftovers in the fridge. Lauren's message came back so clearly I could almost see it glowing on my phone. The difference was that nobody had left this sandwich for me because I was not worth inviting somewhere. I had bought it myself. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my hand. Eric's name was right there. One call. That was all it would take. I could say I had overreacted. I could blame grief, pride, loneliness, anything that would let all of us avoid discussing what had really happened. I pictured my old room, Emma knocking on the door Saturday morning, a kitchen with a full-size stove, coffee that didn't come from a paper packet. For a few minutes, going back sounded less like surrender and more like common sense. My thumb moved toward Eric's number. Then I remembered something my old district supervisor used to say whenever a repair crew wanted to keep patching the same broken system. If you keep fixing the symptom, don't act surprised when the problem comes back. I put the phone in my pocket. Then I put on my jacket and went for a walk. Maple Street Diner was 3 blocks from the motel. I had been there 4 or 5 times since moving in, mostly because the coffee was decent and nobody cared how long an old man sat with one cup. That evening, the place was nearly empty. I took a booth near the window. A waitress named Linda brought me coffee. She looked to be somewhere around my age, maybe a few years younger, with silver beginning to show through brown hair she wore pinned up for work. "You want the meatloaf special?" she asked. "Coffee's enough. You keep ordering coffee. Frank's going to start charging you rent." I smiled. "Tell Frank I already have one landlord." She glanced at the phone on the table. A job listing was open on the screen. "You still looking?" I looked up. "Is it that obvious? You've been reading job ads every time you come in here." I turned the phone face down. Not having much luck. Linda wiped the edge of the table with her cloth. "What kind of work?" "Anything I can still do that somebody will pay me for." She studied me for a moment, then nodded toward the swinging door behind the counter. "Frank lost his morning prep guy last week." I looked toward the kitchen. "I've never worked in a restaurant." "I didn't say you had." "Then why are you telling me?" "Because you're looking for work, and there's work through that door." She topped off my coffee. "Not promising he'll hire you." I figured. Linda started to walk away, then turned back. "You can ask." That was all. No speech. No promise that everything happened for a reason. Just a door. I sat there another minute. Then I picked up my resume, walked past the counter, and asked Linda which one was Frank. She pointed toward a broad-shouldered man checking invoices near the kitchen. I introduced myself. Frank glanced at my resume and asked, "Can you be here at 5:30 tomorrow morning?" 5:30, I repeated. Frank looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. "That a problem?" "No." "Then don't be late." I showed up the next morning at 5:20. That was the first thing I knew how to do. For 35 years, if one of my school buildings needed heat before children arrived, nobody cared whether I was tired or whether my knees hurt. The building had to be ready. A restaurant kitchen, I discovered within 20 minutes, was a different kind of building. Frank handed me an apron, introduced me to a 28-year-old line cook named Marcus, and pointed toward 2 sacks of potatoes. "Start there." I had peeled potatoes before. I had never peeled that many while someone beside me cracked eggs. Another person carried hot pans past my shoulder, and a printer somewhere kept spitting out little paper tickets like it was angry at the world. Marcus showed me how much waste I was leaving on each potato. "You're taking half the potato with the skin. I like generous portions." He stared at me. I smiled. He didn't. I adjusted the peeler. After the potatoes came onions, then celery, then peppers, then boxes from the walk-in refrigerator that had to be dated, rotated, and put in specific places. I kept putting things where they made sense to me. Marcus kept moving them back. "Why does the bacon go there?" I finally asked. "Because that's where we reach for it during breakfast rush. That shelf's lower." "Exactly." At the school district, I had spent years teaching younger employees not to confuse habit with efficiency. Apparently, I needed the same lesson. By 8:30, my lower back had started complaining. By 10, my feet had joined in. At 11, Frank pointed to a stainless steel counter I had already wiped twice. "Again, it's clean." It was clean before Marcus portioned chicken on it. I looked at the counter, then at Frank. Then I wiped it again. That first morning did something to my pride I probably needed. At Eric's house, I had been the man people called when something went wrong. At Maple Street Diner, I was the old fellow who didn't know where they kept the plastic wrap. Nobody cared that I had once supervised 23 employees. Nobody cared that I could diagnose a circulation pump by listening to it for 30 seconds. Here, I didn't know the system. So I had two choices: pretend I did, or learn. The next morning, when Marcus showed me how he arranged his prep station, I paid attention instead of explaining how I would have done it. "Keep what you use most between here and here," he said, indicating the space in front of him. "Every time you take 3 steps for something you could have kept 1 step away, you lose time." That made sense. "Show me the rest." He looked surprised. Then he did. By my 3rd shift, I was still slower than Marcus, but I stopped getting in his way. I started arriving 10 minutes earlier to check what Frank wanted prepped first. I learned where the containers belonged. I learned which refrigerator door stuck unless you lifted the handle. I learned that Linda drank her coffee black but somehow forgot where she set the cup at least 6 times a morning. At the end of my 3rd shift, Frank caught me taking off my apron. "You available Tuesday?" "Yes." "Thursday?" "Yes." 5:30 both days. I tried not to look too pleased. "I'll be here." It wasn't a career. It wasn't even enough hours to solve my money problem yet. But it was the first time since leaving Eric's house that somebody had asked whether I was available, instead of assuming I was. That afternoon, Eric called while I was sitting in my pickup outside the motel. His voice sounded tired. "How's the job hunt?" "I found something temporary." "Doing what?" "Kitchen prep." There was a pause. "At a restaurant?" "A diner." Another pause. I could almost hear him deciding what to say. "Well, that's something. It payee." "Dad, you don't have to do that." There it was again. As though working in a kitchen was somehow worse than living in his spare bedroom waiting for somebody to need a ride. "I know." Eric sighed. "We're still trying to sort everything out here." "How's Emma?" "She's fine. Lauren found someone for afternoons this week." "Good." "I missed another late meeting yesterday." I didn't answer. He continued. "Marianne already thinks I have enough on my plate at home." The sentence caught my attention. Why would Marianne think that? "What?" "Your boss. Why does she know what's on your plate at home?" Eric hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "She's my manager, Dad. We talk." "All right. She knows I've got family responsibilities." I assumed he meant Emma. Maybe Lauren's work schedule. Maybe the mess created when I left. There was nothing unusual about a boss knowing an employee had a family. Still, something about the way he said it stayed with me. Before I could ask anything else, Eric said Marianne was calling and ended our conversation. The next morning at the diner, I arrived before sunrise. By the end of the shift, I had peeled vegetables, portioned meat, stocked dry goods, cleaned 2 work tables, and managed not to have Marcus correct me more than 3 times. I considered that progress. Frank came out of the walk-in carrying an empty stock pot. He set it in front of me. "You ever make chicken noodle soup?" Frank's question took me back farther than I expected. I rested both hands on the rim of the stock pot. "A few hundred times." Frank raised an eyebrow. "At home?" "Mostly. That's not the same as cooking for 60 people. I figured it wasn't. He nodded toward the prep table. "Show me what you've got." Helen had been the real cook in our house for most of our marriage. She could look into a refrigerator that seemed empty and somehow put dinner on the table an hour later. I learned because life eventually required it. During the later years of our marriage, Helen tired more easily, so I started taking over certain nights. At first, I followed her around the kitchen asking questions she thought any grown man should already know. "How much time?" "Enough." "That's not a measurement." "It is if you've been married to me 30 years. Chicken soup was one of the first things she trusted me to make without supervision. Nothing fancy. Chicken, onion, carrots, celery, broth, egg noodles, a little thyme, black pepper, and thyme. Frank gave me room at the back prep station while Marcus worked breakfast. Cooking one pot for customers felt strangely different from cooking at home. At home, if the carrots were uneven, nobody cared. Here, everything had to be consistent. Portions mattered. Timing mattered. Food safety mattered. Frank stopped me twice. Once because I reached for the same spoon after handling raw chicken. Once because I had filled the pot too high. I listened. By 11:30, the soup was ready. Frank dipped in a clean spoon, blew across it, and tasted. His face gave me nothing. "Well?" I asked. He swallowed. "That'll sell." Coming from Frank, it felt like a standing ovation. Linda carried the first bowls out during lunch. 20 minutes later, she came back through the swinging doors. "Table 6 wants to know who made the soup." I looked up. "Why?" They ordered another bowl. Marcus grinned without looking away from the grill. Careful, Walt. Fame changes people. Then I'm safe. Another regular asked about it before the lunch rush ended. Frank didn't congratulate me. He simply told me to make another batch Thursday. That was better. Praise was nice. Another shift paid rent. When I checked my phone during break, I had 3 missed calls from Eric. I called him back from behind the diner. You okay? Depends what you mean by okay. What happened? I missed Cleveland. I leaned against the brick wall. What's Cleveland? The overnight trip I told you about. Regional rollout. I thought Lauren found childcare. She did. Then Emma woke up sick. Is she all right? She's fine now. Just a fever. But the sitter wouldn't come. Lauren had closing scheduled, and I couldn't leave. I understood that. A sick child changed plans. That wasn't anybody's failure. But Eric sounded as if the world had personally broken a promise to him. Marianne wasn't happy, he said. This is part of that 90-day review, transition review. All right? They can adjust the role if they think I'm not ready for the schedule. I remembered the question I had asked him days earlier. What was the plan? Apparently, there still wasn't much of one. Then Eric said, I told them everything at home was stable. Something about the sentence caught me. Them? Marianne, management. You told them that before you took the position? Of course. What did stable mean? Dad, I don't know. Stable. Lauren works. Emma's in school. You were there. There it was again. You were there. Before I could answer, he said, Lauren wants to talk to you. Her voice came on a moment later. Dad, can we please be reasonable about this? I thought we were. We need a few weeks. For what? To get through Eric's review and arrange something permanent. You want me to move back? Temporarily. I looked through the back window into the kitchen. Frank was writing something on the schedule board. Lauren continued, You don't have to do all the things you used to. We just need a little help with Emma until things settle down. Things settle down. I had spent years being the person who made things settle down. When? Starting tomorrow would help. Frank opened the back door. Walt. I covered the phone. Yes? You free Friday and Sunday? To prep? Cook. Soup Friday. Meatloaf Sunday. Marcus will be here with you. 2 cooking shifts. My first instinct was to ask whether he could give them to someone else. Tomorrow, Eric might need me. Sunday, Lauren might have clients. Emma might need a ride. Then I caught myself. Frank was waiting for an answer. Yes, I said, I'm free. He nodded and went inside. Lauren had heard enough. You're choosing diner shifts over helping your son? I looked at my hands. They still smelled faintly of celery and thyme. I'm choosing work I already agreed to do. You haven't even agreed yet. I just did. Lauren went quiet. Then Eric took the phone back. Dad, do you understand what's at stake for me? Yes. And you're still saying no? I am. The word felt unfamiliar in my mouth, but it fit. That night, just after I got back to the motel, Eric called again. This time there was no frustration in his voice. There was suspicion. Dad, what exactly did you tell Marianne? I sat up. I've never spoken to your boss. The words hung between us. Eric didn't answer right away. I could hear something moving on his end, maybe a cabinet door closing, then Lauren saying something too low for me to make out. Then why did Marianne ask me whether things had gotten harder since you moved out, he said. I sat on the edge of the motel bed. How does she know I moved out? Another pause. Eric? I told her. You told your boss I moved out? I had to explain why I missed Cleveland. That explains Cleveland. It doesn't explain why you just accused me of talking to her. He sighed. Because she said I might have underestimated how much support changed at home. Support. Not childcare. Not scheduling. Support. I stared at Helen's photograph on the nightstand. What exactly does Marianne think I was doing at your house? Dad, don't make this into something. I'm asking a question. She knows you lived with us. I know that. And she knows Mom died. So? Silence again. I had supervised enough people to recognize the sound of someone searching for a version of the truth that would cause the least damage. Eric, I said, what did you tell these people about me? I never lied. That answer told me there was something to find. I didn't ask whether you lied. He breathed out slowly. When you moved in after Mom died, people assumed you were having a hard time. I was having a hard time. You know what I mean. No, I don't. His voice tightened. They thought you didn't want to be alone anymore. That part was true. The first months after Helen died, the silence in our house had been unbearable. I would catch myself listening for her footsteps or waiting to hear her call from another room. But loneliness was not helplessness. What else? Nothing. Eric, He was quiet long enough that I stood up and walked to the window. Cars moved along the interstate beyond the motel parking lot. Finally, he said, "A few people got the impression Lauren and I were helping take care of you." I turned away from the glass. "Take care of me how?" "It wasn't specific." "Then make it specific now." "Dad, they knew you were older, retired. Mom was gone. You moved in with us. People put things together. And when they put the wrong things together, what did you say?" He didn't answer. I thought about Marianne at that restaurant. His coworkers. Their spouses. Lauren's parent. Then I thought about the things I had done the week before they left me home. Picked Emma up from school 4 times. Cooked dinner 3 nights. Replaced the washer under the sink. Bought groceries. Scheduled the plumber. Sat with Emma while Eric and Lauren were both out late. Not one of those things made me a hero. Families help each other. But apparently, somewhere outside that house, the direction of that help had been reversed. You let them think you were taking care of me. I never said I was feeding you with a spoon, Dad. That's not what I said. You're making it sound worse than it was. Did they think I needed you financially? No. Did they think I needed help managing my life? Eric hesitated. Some of them probably did. And you corrected them? I didn't see a reason to discuss private family details at work. I almost laughed. Private family details had apparently been public enough when they made him look generous. So when somebody said, "What a good son you were for taking in your widowed father," what did you do? Nothing. That silence answered me. You thanked them, didn't you? Dad, you thanked them. I may have said we were doing what family does. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not a direct lie. Something cleaner. Sufesh. A story built from omissions. How long? What? How long have people at work believed this? I don't know. A couple years maybe. A couple years. I lowered myself back onto the bed. Suddenly the dinner looked different. Until that moment, I had thought Lauren wanted me gone because she worried I would talk too loudly about boilers or mention shopping at discount stores. Cruel. Yes. Shallow, certainly. But now I pictured myself sitting beside Marianne while someone asked how retirement was treating me. I might have mentioned picking Emma up most afternoons, or cooking because Eric worked late, or waiting for the furnace contractor. Nothing dramatic, just ordinary conversation. And ordinary conversation could have ruined Eric's carefully polished version of our household without me even realizing there was a version to ruin. Was that why you didn't want me at the dinner? That was Lauren's decision. No. I said it quietly. Lauren said I'd embarrass you. You were standing right there. She worried you might say something people would misunderstand. Misunderstand? I felt my grip tighten around the phone. They already misunderstood, Eric. You just liked their misunderstanding better than the truth. He had no answer for that. Neither did I. We ended the call a few minutes later without resolving anything. Afterward, I sat in the motel room looking at my hands. For weeks, every time I replayed that night, Lauren had been at the center of it. Lauren's words, Lauren's massage, Lauren's contempt. It had been easier that way. She was my daughter-in-law. Eric was my son. I had spent weeks blaming Lauren. That night, I finally asked myself why I had worked so hard to keep blaming only her. 6 weeks after I left Eric's house, I had developed a routine I hadn't expected to enjoy. I woke before 5, drove to Maple Street Diner, worked whatever hours Frank gave me, and came back to the motel smelling like onions, coffee, and whatever had been on the grill that morning. The room was still too small, and the weekly charge still bothered me every time it hit my account, but it no longer felt like a place where I was hiding. It felt temporary. That mattered. On Thursday evening, I had just taken off my shoes when Eric called. I almost didn't answer. We had spoken several times since the conversation about what his coworkers believed. None of those calls had lasted long. "Hey," I said. "Dad." Something in his voice made me sit up. "What happened?" "I'm about to lose my promotion." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I had imagined those words ever since the night I walked out, though not with any satisfaction. Eric had wanted that job for years. "When did you find out?" "Today." Marianne moved my transition review up. I thought that was at 90 days. It was supposed to be. He sounded exhausted. "She says there are concerns." "What kind?" "Availability, reliability, whether I can handle the regional schedule." I rubbed one hand across my knee. "What happened?" Eric started listing things. He had missed the Cleveland trip. He had arrived late to 2 morning meetings because the new childcare arrangement did not begin early enough. One evening, Lauren had been showing a house when Emma called from school with a stomachache, and Eric had left work. Another time, a client problem ran into dinner, and he had told Marianne he needed to handle something at home. None of those situations sounded outrageous by themselves. Parents dealt with sick children. Plans failed. People ran late. But stacked together, they looked different. Marianne asked me today whether I understood what this position requires, Eric said. And what did you tell her? That I do. Do you? Of course I do. I let that sit for a second. Then he said, Dad, I need you to come back. There it was. Not I miss you. Not I was wrong. Come back. For how long? Just until the review is over. And then we'll figure something out. You've been figuring something out for 6 weeks. That's not fair. Why? Because we're trying. I believe you. He went quiet, perhaps because he had expected an argument. I continued. But you keep trying to solve one emergency at a time. What am I supposed to do? Make a household plan that doesn't depend on emergencies. We have childcare now, until the sitter cancels. That can happen to anyone. Yes. Which is why you need a backup. We can't have 5 babysitters waiting around. I didn't say 5. I got up and walked to the little counter beside the microwave. You knew this job involved travel. You knew Lauren's work sometimes runs into evenings. You knew Emma's school closes at the same time every weekday. Those aren't surprises. I know. Then stop telling your company everything at home is stable unless you've actually built something stable. His breathing changed. Is this payback? No. It feels like it. If I wanted payback, I'd be enjoying this conversation. That stopped him. I looked at Helen's photograph. I'm sorry this is happening, Eric. I meant it. But I'm not moving back to keep your promotion alive. He didn't answer. For several seconds, all I could hear was the faint sound of traffic on his end. Then he said, Nate's been helping. Nate from your department? Yeah. I remembered the name from years of hearing Eric talk about work. What's he helping with? He took Chicago when I couldn't travel. That was good of him. And he's covered some evening calls. How many? I don't know. A few. I didn't think much of it. At the school district, we covered for each other all the time. Somebody's kid got sick. Somebody's car broke down. Somebody had a doctor appointment. That was what a decent crew did. You owe him one, I said. I know. Make sure he knows you know. Eric gave a tired little laugh. You still sound like a supervisor. Occupational damage. For the first time in several weeks, the tension between us eased, only slightly. Before hanging up, Eric asked once more, You really won't come back for a month? No. What if this costs me the job? The promotion is yours to keep or lose, Eric. I paused. So build a life that can support it. The next morning, I went to work before sunrise. Frank had me helping with breakfast prep and starting another pot of soup before lunch. I spent most of the shift too busy to think about Eric. The following afternoon, I was carrying a tub of chopped onions toward the walk-in when Linda caught my attention. What? She nodded toward the front entrance. Lauren stood just inside the diner. She was dressed for work, heels and all, looking around as if she had walked into the wrong building. Then she saw me. Her eyes dropped to my apron. She crossed the room and stopped a few feet away. You left our family for this? Lauren's eyes moved from my apron to the plastic gloves in my hand, then toward the counter where Linda was refilling coffee for 2 regulars. I set the tub of onions down. No, I said. This came after I left. You know what I mean. I don't think I do. She glanced around the diner again. There was nothing fancy about Maple Street. Vinyl booths. A pie case near the register. A coffee stain on one menu that Linda had been complaining about since Tuesday. Lauren lowered her voice. You're living in a motel and chopping vegetables for strangers when you have a home. I had a room. That's ridiculous. Is it? She folded her arms. Eric could lose everything he's worked for. He told me, and you still won't come back. I told him the same thing I'm telling you. This is stubbornness. Frank looked through the kitchen window. I held up one finger to tell him I needed a minute. Lauren noticed. You have to ask permission to talk to your own family now? I'm working. Her mouth tightened. That small reaction told me something. She had come expecting to find me desperate. Instead, she had found people waiting for me to finish a job. Come back for a month, she said. That's all we're asking. We'll get through Eric's review. I'll rearrange some clients, and then we can make permanent plans. Yes, we. Did you and Eric make a plan before his promotion? She looked away. We thought things would continue the way they had. There it was again. I wiped my hands on my apron. Lauren, I want to ask you something. What? The dinner. Her shoulders stiffened. Are we really doing that again? Yes. I already said I shouldn't have sent that text. I'm not asking about the text. She waited. Was leaving me home your decision? Her expression changed. Eric told you it was? He said you were worried I might embarrass him. I was. That isn't what I asked. A customer passed behind her on the way to the restroom. Lauren stepped closer to the counter. Did you decide I wasn't invited? She rubbed one thumb against the side of her handbag. Not by myself. It shouldn't have surprised me anymore. Still, I felt something sink in my stomach. What did Eric say? Walt, what did my son say? For a moment she looked tired rather than angry. Then she spoke quietly. He said, I just want one night where Dad doesn't remind everyone where I came from. I stared at her. There was no misunderstanding in that sentence. No missing context. No version I could soften for him. He said that? Yes. When? The week before the dinner. I thought about Eric standing in his suit while I told him Helen would have taken 50 pictures. He had smiled at me. All the while, he had already decided I was something better kept at home. Lauren pulled out the stool beside the counter and sat. I didn't invent this whole thing, Walt. No. But you helped. I know. Her answer came so quickly that it took some of the fight out of me. She looked toward the front windows. I grew up moving every couple of years. My father's business would have one good season, then a terrible one. There were times my mother put groceries on a credit card and prayed the payment wouldn't hit before payday. I said nothing. When I finally started making decent money, I became obsessed with not looking like we were struggling. And you thought I made you look poor. That's not exactly it. It's close enough. She looked at me. I wanted people to see Eric as someone who belonged in that room. And I was evidence that he didn't? Her face tightened. I know how it sounds. It sounds the way it was. I was scared. That explains something, Lauren. It doesn't excuse it. She looked down at her hands. I had spent weeks telling myself she was the one who had changed Eric. She cared too much about appearances. She pushed too hard. She had sent the leftovers message. All of that was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. Eric had wanted that door closed too. Maybe that was why I had resisted seeing it. Anger at a daughter-in-law was easier to carry than disappointment in a son. Lauren broke the silence. He's barely sleeping. Eric? He's constantly checking his phone. If Emma needs something while he's working, he calls me first. If I can't fix it, he starts calling Nate. Nate from work? Yes. What does Nate have to do with Emma? Nothing directly. Eric calls him when something here means he can't handle something there. I remembered Chicago. The evening calls. You mean Nate covers for him? A lot, lately. How much is a lot? I don't know. More than Eric admits. That bothered me, though I couldn't have said exactly why. Lauren stood. His review's coming up soon. I know. I just wish you understood what could happen. I do understand. No, I mean really understood. I looked back toward the kitchen. I spent 35 years watching people make plans that only worked as long as nothing went wrong. I understand more than you think. Frank appeared in his office doorway and caught my eye. Lauren followed my gaze. Eric's future is going to be decided soon, she said. Then she looked toward Frank's office. Looks like yours might be too. Frank waited until Lauren was gone before calling me into his office. He didn't offer me a chair. That was usually how I knew a conversation would be short. You've got regulars asking what days you cook, he said. I'll take that as good news. It is. He folded his arms. But people liking your soup doesn't mean I can put you on a busy line every Sunday. I knew what he meant. During quiet shifts, I could keep up. During breakfast, when 6 orders hit at once and everybody started reaching for the same ingredients, I still lost seconds deciding what came first. In a kitchen, seconds multiplied fast. You're dependable, Frank said. You listen, you don't complain, but when it gets heavy, you slow down. I know. I'm not saying you're done. That sounded suspiciously like you were about to. He almost smiled. Show me Sunday. Sunday arrived with rain. By 10:30, every booth was full. By 11, people were waiting near the door. Marcus worked the grill. A younger cook named Danny handled eggs and fryers. I had prep, soup, sandwiches, and whatever else started falling behind. At first, I tried to solve the problem the way I thought Frank wanted. Move faster. So I moved faster. I sliced too many tomatoes before checking what we actually needed. I put 2 sandwich orders together in the wrong sequence. I opened the walk-in 3 times in 10 minutes because I kept forgetting one item. Marcus called for onions. Danny needed clean pans. Linda shouted that table 12 had been waiting 25 minutes. The ticket printer kept going. I could feel sweat gathering beneath my collar. Walt, pick it up, Frank called. I'm trying. That was the problem. Everybody was trying. Marcus had 7 things on the grill. Danny was running between stations. Linda was carrying food, refilling drinks, and answering the register because another server had called out sick. Nobody was standing still, and we were falling further behind. I reached for another stack of plates and suddenly remembered a Monday morning at Jefferson Middle School nearly 15 years earlier. A pipe had burst over the weekend. 3 classrooms were wet. 2 custodians were moving furniture. An electrician was waiting for access to a panel. My best maintenance man was being called from room to room because everyone trusted him to fix everything. For the first half hour, we had looked impressive. 12 people moving fast, nothing getting finished. I had stopped them, not because they needed to work harder, because they needed fewer priorities. I looked around Frank's kitchen. Same problem, different uniforms. Marcus, I called. What? How many things can you actually keep on that grill without slowing everything down? He looked at me as though I had lost my mind. Right now? Right now. 6, maybe 7. You've got 11. No kidding. I pulled 4 tickets from his rail and moved them aside. Frank saw me. What are you doing? Buying him 3 minutes. We've got customers waiting. They're already waiting. I turned to Danny. What can you finish quickest? Fries and the 2 breakfast plates. Do those. Leave the chicken basket for a minute. Then I checked the sandwiches instead of starting another batch of prep nobody had asked for. 3 turkey clubs, 2 grilled cheeses, 1 tuna melt. I had everything for those. Linda, I called. Which table has waited longest? 8. What are they missing? 2 sandwiches and fries. Give me 4 minutes. I stopped trying to make the entire kitchen faster. I started trying to make the next 4 minutes useful. We grouped similar orders. I moved extra bread, sliced meat, and plates within arm's reach instead of crossing the kitchen every time. When Marcus asked for help, I didn't automatically say yes. What do you need? Somebody to plate these. I can do that. When Danny called for someone to refill his station, I asked whether he could finish what was already cooking first. He could, so he did. Nobody became the answer to every problem. Not Marcus because he was fastest. Not Danny because he was youngest. Not me because I wanted to prove something. The tickets kept coming, but the rail stopped looking impossible. At some point, I heard a faint buzzing from the locker area. My phone. I ignored it. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. Then again. During a brief lull, I opened my locker just far enough to check the screen. Eric. 3 missed calls. A message underneath them. Nate can't cover tonight. I stared at it for a second. Whatever Eric needed, I couldn't solve it from behind a diner stove. I put the phone back. The next wave hit before noon. This time we stayed organized. Not perfect, but controlled. At 1:30, the waiting area was empty. At 2, Linda brought back the last lunch plate. Marcus leaned both hands on the counter. Well, he said, breathing hard. The old man survived. I handed him a towel. So did you. Frank said nothing. He looked at the cleared ticket rail, then at me, and went into his office. I didn't know whether I had passed his test. I only knew I had stopped trying to be the fastest person in the room. When the rush finally ended, I checked my phone. Eric had called 7 times. The 7 missed calls sat on my screen while the kitchen slowly returned to normal. I was still staring at Eric's name when Frank stepped out of his office. Got a minute? I slipped the phone into my pocket and followed him. Frank leaned against his desk. You're not the fastest man I've ever put in that kitchen. I was afraid you were going to say that. You know what you are? I waited. You're the first one who noticed everybody was working hard and still accomplishing nothing. He nodded toward the kitchen. Marcus can cook circles around you. Danny moves twice as fast. But today, when things went bad, you stopped feeding the chaos. I looked through the office window at Marcus restocking his station. That was my old job. No. Your old job was fixing schools. My old job was figuring out what had to happen first. Frank considered that. Then he pulled a schedule from his desk. I can give you regular mornings, part-time, prep and cooking, Sundays when I need you. For a second, I just looked at the paper. Regular hours. Not a favor. Not 3 trial mornings. Something I had earned. I'd like that. Good. Because I hate training people. That was as close to congratulations as Frank was likely to get. I walked back to my pickup feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Then I remembered the 7 calls. I phoned Eric before starting the engine. He answered immediately. Where were you? Working. I've been calling for hours. I saw. His voice sounded different. Flot. What happened? He didn't answer at first. Then he said, they moved me back. I sat very still. To your old position? Yes. I'm sorry. And I was. For all the anger between us, I remembered the pride on his face when he got that promotion. When did they decide? This morning. My first thought was the obvious one. Cleveland. The late meetings, Emma getting sick, the childcare problems that had started after I left. Was it the availability issue? That was part of what started the review. But Eric laughed once, without humor. But apparently that wasn't the real problem. I waited. Marianne went through everything from the last 6 weeks. Trips, calls, client problems. Who handled what? Not? Yes. I thought of the message. Nate can't cover tonight. Eric continued. When I couldn't take Chicago, Nate went. When I had to leave early, he took the evening call. There were 2 customer issues he handled because I was tied up at home. That sounds like coworkers covering each other. That's what I said. And? She asked how many times I had covered for Nate. I already knew the answer from Eric's silence. Not many? None lately. I leaned back against the seat. Eric's voice tightened. I was going to. Once things settled down. There it was again. Once things settled down. What happened last night? I promised a regional customer somebody would stay on a distribution problem until it was resolved. Were you that somebody? No. Nate? Yes. And he couldn't do it. He had already worked late 3 nights. His daughter had a school thing. So what did you do? I tried to find someone else. After you made the promise? Eric went quiet. Yes. I closed my eyes. I had seen versions of that mistake for decades. A supervisor promised a building would reopen Monday because he assumed the electrician could work Saturday. A principal scheduled an event because she assumed my crew would stay late. The promise always sounded easy when somebody else was expected to pay for it. What did Marianne say? Eric took a long breath. She said my family situation didn't cost me the promotion. That surprised me. She said everybody has things happen at home. Kids get sick. Sitters cancel. People miss trips. I waited. She said the problem was what I did every time something changed. What did you do? I found somebody to carry the part I couldn't. The words landed harder than I expected. Nate, I said. Nate at work. He stopped. Neither of us needed to say the rest. Finally, Eric continued. Marianne said I kept building plans that only worked if another person absorbed the consequences. I looked through the windshield at the diner. An hour earlier, I had stood in a kitchen where our fastest man was overloaded because everybody kept sending him one more problem. And I had recognized the danger immediately. Eric had done the opposite. At home, I had been the person who was always there. At work, Nate had become the person who was always there. I had thought leaving exposed a childcare problem. It had exposed a habit. I'm sorry, son, I said. He was quiet. I really am. I kept thinking if you came back, everything would go back to normal. Maybe that was the problem. Another long silence followed. Then Eric asked if we could meet. We sat that evening at a quiet table near the back of the diner. His shoulders looked lower than I remembered. For several minutes, neither of us touched the coffee Linda brought. Then Eric looked directly at me. Dad, after Mom died, did you stay with us because you needed us or because we needed you? Eric's question stayed with me after the coffee cooled between us. I had no good answer that night, not one I could give without lying to both of us. 2 days later, Eric called and asked if I wanted to come by for the rest of my things. I almost told him to box everything up. Then I thought about Helen's recipe box, my old district jacket, family photographs, and papers I did not want anyone else sorting through. I'll come Saturday morning, I said. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it always had. For years, I had walked through that front door carrying grocery bags, school backpacks, plumbing parts, takeout, and whatever else somebody needed. This time I carried nothing. Eric opened the door before I knocked. Morning. Morning. He stepped aside. No speech. No apology waiting in the hallway. That was probably better. I had heard enough words lately. What I wanted to know was whether anything in that house could change when nobody was trying to talk me into making life easier for them again. My old room looked smaller than I remembered. Helen's photograph was gone because I had taken it, leaving a pale rectangle on the nightstand. I opened the closet. My work jacket still hung at the back. Eric reached for an empty box. I can help. You don't have to. I know. That answer stopped me, so I let him. We packed quietly. Sweaters, a tackle box, shoes. Drawings Emma had made over the years. Then I found Helen's recipe box on the top shelf of the hall cabinet. It was old wood, one corner chipped from a move 30 years ago. Inside were index cards in her handwriting, some stained with grease or tomato sauce. Eric picked up one. Mom's meatloaf. Don't get sentimental. She stole that recipe from your grandmother. He smiled. I knew it. In the spare room, Eric opened a drawer of old paperwork and lifted a yellow legal pad. I recognized the bent corner, the arrows, the boxes and names across the page. I remember that, Eric said. So do I. Years earlier, before the promotions and regional meetings, he had supervised a warehouse with a backlog that would not clear. Every new problem landed on the same employee, a man named Rick, because Rick knew more than anybody else. Eric had complained that everyone was working hard and nothing was improving. We sat at my kitchen table one evening while I asked him to draw every step from receiving an order to getting it out the door. Then I asked, "Who handles the exceptions?" He pointed to Rick. Late truck? Rick. Damaged inventory? Rick. Missing paperwork? Rick. Priority customer? Rick. So what happens when Rick is already fixing something? I had asked. Eric stared at the page. Everything waits. We changed the coverage on paper that night. Not because I knew warehouses better than Eric, but because I knew what happened when one capable person became everybody's emergency plan. Eric turned the pad in his hands. You told me this. I asked questions. You told me I'd built the whole operation around one guy never saying no. Something like that. He looked down, and then I did exactly the same thing. With Nate, he nodded. Then he looked at me. And with you, I did not rescue him from the sentence. Yes. He sat on the edge of the bed. I'm sorry. I believed he meant it. There was no excuse attached to it. No request that I come home. No reminder of Emma or the promotion. That mattered. But belief did not erase what had happened. I sat across from him. There's something I owe you too. Eric frowned. When your mother died, I didn't move in only because you needed help. He waited. The house was too quiet. I hated eating alone. Then Emma needed a ride. You needed something fixed. Lauren needed groceries. Every time somebody asked me for something, I had somewhere to be. My throat tightened. Being useful made the quiet easier. So we did need you. Yes. I looked at him. But I needed to be needed too. That was mine to own. I had volunteered before anyone demanded. I had made myself available until availability became expectation. But that did not make the dinner acceptable. It did not make the story at work acceptable. It did not make Lauren's message acceptable. I pointed to the yellow pad. My mistake was giving too much without asking what it was turning into. Yours was deciding that meant my time belonged to you. Eric nodded slowly. We packed the rest of the room together. Understanding had entered the house. So had accountability. Neither one required me to move back in. 2 days later, Emma texted, "Grandpa, Dad told Mom they owe you a real apology." Mom started crying and walked out. Emma's message sat on my phone for most of that afternoon. I didn't answer right away. She had already been caught in enough adult trouble that wasn't hers to carry. I finally sent back, "You don't need to worry about any of this, sweetheart. Your mom and dad love you, and so do I." The next morning, Lauren called. "Can I see you?" I almost asked why. Instead, I told her I finished at the diner at 2. She arrived 10 minutes after my shift ended and asked if we could sit in a booth near the back. There was no makeup hiding the tiredness around her eyes. She wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee and stared at it. "I owe you an apology." I waited. She took a breath. "I excluded you from Eric's dinner because I thought you would embarrass us." "Not might, would," she continued. "I sent you that message about the leftovers knowing everybody else was eating together." Her voice dropped. "And for years I let you buy groceries, pick Emma up, stay home for contractors, fix things, cook for us, and cover whatever we couldn't handle." She looked at me. "Then I acted like you were the one depending on us." That was the apology I had needed. Not, "I'm sorry you were hurt." Not, "Things got out of hand." The actual things. "I appreciate you saying that. I was cruel." Yes. Her eyes lowered. I didn't say it to punish her. I said it because forgiving somebody did not require helping them edit the past. Lauren nodded. "We've hired an after-school program for Emma 3 days a week. I changed my showing schedule for Thursdays. Eric handles Monday and Wednesday pickups. And if something falls through, we figure it out. You don't call me?" She gave a tired smile. "Not unless we're inviting Grandpa somewhere." That mattered more than she probably understood. The changes were costing them. After-school care wasn't cheap. Lauren had stopped accepting some evening showings. Eric was doing more errands himself, and the yard had looked badly overdue the last time I drove past. Their lives had not fallen apart. They had simply become responsible for them. A week later, Eric met me for coffee. I got another project, he said. Promotion? No. He didn't sound bitter when he said it. A smaller distribution project. 3 locations. Marianne said I can prove I learned something or prove she was right. What are you going to do? That's why I wanted to talk to you. I took a drink of coffee. What do you think you should do? He smiled faintly. I knew you were going to do that. You asked for advice, not an answer. I was hoping the difference was negotiable. It isn't. He pulled a notebook from his briefcase. I've been mapping responsibilities. Who owns each problem? Who backs them up? What happens if somebody's unavailable? That sounds sensible. I wanted you to look at it. No. His eyebrows rose. Not even look? Eric, if I build the system for you, what exactly have you learned? He leaned back. For a second, I saw the boy who used to ask me to finish his science projects because I knew how to make things work. Then he closed the notebook. Fair. I pointed at it. I'll give you one rule. He waited. Build a life that still works when I say no. He was quiet for a moment. Then he wrote it down. Before we left, he mentioned Marianne had said something similar during their last meeting. She says managers who don't respect the people on the floor eventually lose the floor. I smiled. Sounds like she's managed a few things herself. Apparently, so had I. With the regular hours Frank gave me, my finances finally started making sense. My pension and Social Security covered the basics. The diner wages gave me enough breathing room that I could stop watching every motel charge eat into my savings. I found a 1-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from Maple Street. Nothing impressive. 2nd floor. Small balcony. Beige carpet. A kitchen where 2 people would have had trouble passing each other. It was mine. The day I moved in, Eric offered to help carry boxes. I let him. Lauren brought Emma over later with a small potted plant for the windowsill. Emma walked through every room as if I had bought a mansion. Where's my room? You don't have one. She frowned. Where do I sleep? I pointed toward the couch. That folds out. She considered it. Okay, then that's my room. I put Helen's photograph on the bedroom dresser. Her recipe box went into the kitchen. My old cast iron skillet went into the bottom cabinet. For the first time since she died, I arranged a home around what I wanted instead of where I was useful. Nobody needed me there. That was exactly why I could breathe. A month later, Eric invited me to the company picnic. I don't need you to watch, Emma, he said. I want my father there. A month earlier, I would have found a reason not to go, but Eric had not asked me to drive Emma, carry folding chairs, fix anything, or make myself useful. He had asked me to come because I was his father. So on Saturday afternoon, I put on a clean blue button-down shirt, khaki pants, and the brown shoes I usually saved for church or funerals, then drove to the company picnic. It was held at a park outside Dayton with covered pavilions, picnic tables, lawn games, and enough catered food to feed a small school. Eric spotted me before I reached the pavilion. Dad, he smiled, not nervously, not like he needed to check who was watching. He simply walked over and shook my hand. Glad you came. So when Emma ran up and grabbed me around the waist. Lauren followed more slowly. You look nice, she said. Don't sound so surprised. She laughed, and for once there was no strain in it. Eric began introducing me to people. Some names I recognized from years of hearing him talk about work. Others were new. Then a man about Eric's age shook my hand and said, Good to finally meet you, Mr. Bennett. Eric's talked about having you with them after your wife passed. I saw Eric's shoulders tighten. A few weeks earlier, he might have let that sentence float by. This time he didn't. Actually, he said, I should clear something up. The man looked at him. Eric glanced at me, then back at his coworker. Dad wasn't living with us because he couldn't manage. Honestly, we depended on him more than he depended on us. I stayed quiet. He handled school pickups, dinners, repairs, half the things around the house we kept assuming would just get done. The coworker looked slightly embarrassed. I guess I had that backward. So did I, Eric said. There was no speech after that. No dramatic gathering of everyone within earshot. He just corrected the story whenever it naturally came up. That was enough. Later, Eric introduced me to Marianne Cole. She was shorter than I expected, with gray beginning at her temples and the kind of handshake that made me think she had spent years in rooms where people tried to waste her time. So you're Walt. That's what they call me. I've heard you worked for the school district. Maintenance, 35 years. Supervisor? Toward the end? What kind of systems? Whatever broke. She smiled. That sounds familiar. We talked for a few minutes about aging buildings, emergency calls, preventive maintenance, and the difference between replacing something on schedule and waiting until it failed at the worst possible moment. Nothing complicated, nothing I would have been afraid to say at Eric's promotion dinner. Then Marianne said, "My father was a diesel mechanic for 38 years. I looked at her. Trucks? Mostly. Fleet work." She nodded toward the pavilion, where several managers were standing around talking. He used to say the people in the offices always knew when a truck stopped moving, but not necessarily what kept it moving the other 364 days. I laughed. I knew a few school principals like that. "I'm sure you did." She glanced toward Eric. "Operations is a funny business. The higher people climb, the easier it gets to forget the floor." I remembered Eric telling me she often said something similar. Marianne continued, "I've always respected people who understand the work underneath the reports." There was no hidden offer in her voice, no sudden recognition that changed Eric's career. She was simply talking to me, and that made the whole thing sting in a different way. Lauren had worried my stories about boilers, broken toilets, discount stores, and old cars would make Eric look small. Eric had worried I would remind people where he came from. Yet the woman he had been so desperate to impress had come from a family not very different from ours. Maybe some people at that dinner would have judged me. Maybe none would have. I would never know. But Eric and Lauren had punished me for a judgment they had invented before anyone else had the chance to make it. Near the food tables, I noticed Nate speaking with two managers. Eric followed my eyes. "That's Nate, the famous Nate." He gave a small, embarrassed smile. "He's handling more of the regional rollout now. How do you feel about that?" Eric took his time answering. He earned the chance. There was disappointment in his face, but no resentment. That was new. Marianne had not handed Eric his promotion back because he apologized to his father. The company had kept moving. Nate had been dependable when Eric wasn't, and now Nate had more responsibility. Consequences did not disappear just because people finally understood them. I respected that. As the picnic wound down, Lauren took Emma to the car while Eric and I carried 2 empty drink coolers back toward the pavilion. When we finished, we stood beside my pickup. Eric rubbed the back of his neck. "You like the apartment?" "I do." "Really?" "Really." He looked toward the parking lot, then back at me. "Dad, would you ever come home?" I looked at my son and said, "No." Eric looked down at the pavement between us. I could see the disappointment in his face, but for once, he didn't argue. "I figured you'd say that. It doesn't mean I don't love you." "I know. I'm not staying away to punish you either." He nodded, though I wasn't sure he completely believed me yet. I leaned against the side of my pickup. "When your mother died, I let helping your family become the center of my life. You got used to it. Lauren got used to it. And I got used to being useful enough that I didn't have to ask myself what I wanted." Eric listened. "If I move back, even with the best intentions, eventually somebody will need a ride. Somebody will need dinner started. Something will break. And sooner or later we'll all start slipping into the same places. So this is permanent. My apartment is." He smiled slightly. That little apartment has everything I need, including something I hadn't known I needed. A front door nobody else expected me to be behind. The months that followed were ordinary. That was probably the best thing that could have happened to us. Eric stayed in his previous position. There was no surprise promotion waiting because he had learned a lesson. Marianne gave him the smaller project she had promised, and he worked through it slowly. Sometimes he called and told me something had gone wrong. I listened. I stopped fixing. Lauren kept selling houses, but she stopped booking every client at whatever hour they wanted. She and Eric traded school pickups. They paid for after-school care. When that fell through, they rearranged their own schedules. Sometimes it cost them money. Sometimes it cost Eric a convenient evening. Sometimes Lauren lost a showing. That was what responsibility looked like when it belonged to the people who actually owned it. Emma came to my apartment most Saturdays. Planned Saturdays, not emergency Saturdays. There was a difference. We went fishing twice. She beat me at cards more often than I care to admit. Some weekends she asked to help at the diner after my shift, and Frank let her sit at the counter while I finished up. My cooking became a small part of Maple Street. Chicken soup on Fridays, meatloaf every other Sunday. Pot roast when Frank found a good price on beef. Nobody wrote newspaper articles about me. Nobody offered me a restaurant. Regular customers simply began asking, "Walt cooking today?" That was enough. One Sunday afternoon, after we closed, Frank handed me a plastic container. "What's this?" "Pot roast." I know what pot roast looks like. Then why'd you ask? I opened the lid. 2 slices of beef, carrots, potatoes, and enough gravy to ruin any healthy intentions I might have had. Leftovers, Frank said. Take them before Marcus does. I stood there holding the container. For a second, I thought of another refrigerator, another plastic box, another message. Dad, finish the leftovers in the fridge. The memory was still there, but the sting wasn't. These leftovers came after a day when people had wanted me in the room. After work I had chosen, food I had helped make, a place where nobody was hiding me. Thanks, I said. Frank shrugged. Bring the container back. Some things never became sentimental. A few weeks later, Eric invited me to Sunday dinner. Not a holiday, not an emergency, just dinner. When I arrived, Lauren opened the door. Come in. The kitchen smelled like roasted chicken. Eric was at the stove. I stopped. Should I call the fire department now or wait? Very funny. Emma ran in from the dining room. Dad cooked. That explains why you look worried. I heard that, Eric said. I walked toward the table. There were 4 plates, 4 glasses, and 1 chair already pulled out for me. No tool bag beside it. No school backpack waiting for homework help. No list of repairs. Lauren didn't ask whether I could look at the loose cabinet hinge. Eric didn't mention Monday morning. We ate. The chicken was a little dry. The potatoes were good. I had seconds anyway. After dinner, Eric and Lauren cleared the table while I stayed seated with Emma, listening to a story about something that had happened at school. Nobody handed me a dish towel. Nobody disappeared while I cleaned up. I noticed that. When it was time to leave, Eric stood at the counter packing the remaining chicken and potatoes into a container. He held it up. Dad, want to take some leftovers? I looked at him, then at Lauren, then at the table where I had just eaten with my family. I smiled. Sure. Eric handed me the container. Driving home that evening, it sat on the passenger seat beside me. Same kind of plastic box, different meaning. For years, I thought being needed meant I belonged. It took leaving that house to learn the difference between someone saving me a chore and someone saving me a seat. And that is the part of this story I keep coming back to. I did not win because my son lost a promotion, and I did not rebuild my life because Lauren finally apologized. The real victory was learning that love should not require one person to disappear into everyone else's needs. For years, I confused usefulness with belonging. I thought that if I kept driving, fixing, cooking, paying, waiting, and saying yes, I was protecting my place in the family. In reality, I was teaching the people I loved that my time would always be available, no matter how they treated me. If you recognize yourself in that, I would tell you this. Help your family, but do not erase yourself for them. Give freely when your heart tells you to, but pay attention when generosity becomes expectation, and expectation becomes entitlement. Do not wait for a public humiliation or a cruel message to decide that your dignity matters. Set boundaries before resentment takes over. And if you have taken someone's love, labor, or loyalty for granted, do not hide behind excuses. Apologize specifically, change your behavior, and accept that forgiveness does not always restore the old arrangement. Sometimes the healthiest reconciliation is not going back. It is building a better relationship from a new distance, with clearer expectations and more respect. I still love my family. I simply stopped proving that love by abandoning myself.